Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of ATD Accidental Trainer podcast. I'm your host, Alexandria Clapp, and today we have with us a very special guest. Seth Godin is the author of more than 22 best-selling books, including Purple Cow, Linchpin, and This is Marketing. He's also the author of one of the world's most popular blogs, and he's an upcoming keynote speaker at our ATD 25 conference in May, and the author of the newest book release, This is Strategy, Make Better Plans. Welcome, Seth.
Thank you for having me. This group is close to my heart, and it's always a pleasure to work with you guys.
Yay. Well, we're going to talk a little bit about your book, a little bit about chocolate, a little bit about our ATD L&D community. But first, we have to talk about you. So can you tell us a little bit about how you landed in the work that you do today? And was there anything accidental along your journey?
I think we need to change the name of the podcast from accidental to intentional. Accidents happen all the time. The question is, what are we going to do with them?
Yeah.
And what we do with them is intentional. I was really fortunate. I had two amazing parents growing up. And I started in the computer game business and the software business. I worked with Isaac Asimov and Arthur C. Clarke's estate. I worked with Michael Crichton and Ray Bradbury. And what I realized is I like to teach and I like to make things, and that I wasn't particularly good at being a manager. And so I'm going to interrupt by saying that a manager and a leader are not the same. Mm-hmm. Managers use power and authority to get other people to do what they want. And a lot of people who are listening to this are managers. We need managers to make the world work. Mm-hmm. Leadership is optional. Leadership is seeing something that hasn't happened yet, painting a picture, and encouraging people to go with you. It's voluntary. So a key part of training is, yes, to teach people how to be a manager, but the real win is when we encourage and teach people how to be a leader. And so what happened for me in my career in the 80s, as I saw technology changing, is I started to do things with intent, not just in reaction, but in response. And I amplified the way that I teach. I've taught hundreds of thousands of people around the world. And I also decided to lean into being a leader as opposed to being a manager. I have no employees whatsoever because I didn't want to keep going down that path of trying to build something bigger than myself that I controlled. But I think I can help teach people how to manage their way to doing that.
Cool. When you were a lot of thoughts popped into my head. I love that maybe our tagline should be from accidental to intentional. That's the kumbaya moment, right? When all of our community has this moment that was at first accidental and it led them to this then intentional career. Yes. When you were describing the difference between manager and leaders, it made me think about how you describe strategy, which is that it's hard to see. And you said something about leaders see something that isn't there yet. So there's lots of parallels there, right? Like, do you have to have a strategy to be a leader? I'm going to have so many questions and ignore the ones that I've prepared. So I'm very excited to jump in and just start talking about strategy. But maybe first we should define how you would define what strategy is.
Strategy is the hard work we do before we do the hard work. It's a philosophy of becoming.
Yes.
It's not a tactic or a list of tasks.
I have that saved right there in my book. Yep. I like that section.
It's the thing that gives us the tactics and the list of tasks. Strategy is built on systems, and systems hide behind culture. So if you are doing things that seem normal, if it's normal to have a day in the office like this, if it's normal for meetings to last exactly 30 or 60 minutes, if it's normal for certain kinds of training to exist, that's because there's a system. And the system is the result of somebody else's strategy. And we have to ask ourselves, what's it for and who's it for? this resume you handed me, what is the purpose of a resume? Where did it come from? What is it helping me do or not do? Right? When I interview people, am I interviewing people to see if they're going to be good talk show hosts? Or am I trying to find people who are going to be best at their job? And that involves strategy. So here's an example if someone's a sports fan, of which I'm not. The book Moneyball is about Billy Beane. And Billy Beane figured out that all the other baseball teams were doing the normal thing when they were picking baseball players. They would draft and recruit baseball players who looked like baseball players. And what Billy Beane did is he came up with a strategy that said, what would be the best way for us to win baseball games? Who are the players that win baseball games? And it turned out he found a kind of player that no one else was looking for. And he was able to build a world-class baseball team for a tenth the price because he had a strategy. So what we're looking for is, who do we seek to become? What is the change we seek to make? And one of the challenges of this ATD community is, thanks to traditional roles and misogyny and historical accidents that should be remedied, a lot of people in this community want to do tasks. They're waiting for instructions. They got promoted because they're good at doing tasks. And you're now in a seat where you get to be a leader. If you're listening to this, you've earned the right in your organization to lead, not just to follow. And they're waiting for you to articulate what you're going to do with all these people, which is the biggest expense in almost every organization. You're the person who's at the core key moment with leverage. All the people, the most expensive asset. What are we going to do with it? What's it for? What's the change we're here to make? That's what strategy is.
I love it. I was thinking about, for myself personally, I just had a baby, so she's going to be 6 months. And
congratulations.
Thank you. So it made me think about, to try to make this an analogy or metaphor, you often have like an existing product. Like, so I have created my baby, and now I'm trying to figure out, like, what is my strategy? Is it that I want to be a good parent, that I want her to be a good kid, that I want her to take more naps? That's like not the strategy. Maybe that's like a tactic or something. So I'm trying to figure this all out. But I think it's similar to the challenge of,
right,
you have an existing thing that you have to deliver on in your role, and someone else created it. And there's probably some things about it that you don't like, but you've been doing this way for a while, or whatever it is, so something like that.
This is great. Yeah.
Yeah. So this is what I'm thinking. And then
What's your little one's name?
her name is Lucy Grace.
Lucy Grace.
Yes.
So let's just take the analogy a little bit further.
Yeah.
So when Lucy Grace is 7, she's going to come home with her first real report card.
Okay.
And if she gets really good grades,
yeah,
is that good? Well, the system says it is. The problem is, that's a false proxy, because what really good grades mean when you're 7 is not that you are particularly smart or gifted. And it's all built on the college industrial complex and the status that comes from being a good parent, which means your kid's going to get into a famous college. And in order to get into famous college, they have to good grades, blah, 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 blah. But there's nothing in the report card of a 7-year-old that is actually relevant to your parenting of Lucy Grace, nor to who she could become as a human. But it's an easy measure. And this is the challenge of almost all human resource kind of training and development issues, which is we resort to false proxies, to things that are easy to measure, but irrelevant. So it doesn't matter how tall someone is. It doesn't make them a good president. And it doesn't matter how fast you type. It doesn't make you a good programmer. So just because it's easy to measure how fast you type doesn't mean we should.
So part of it is being able to see the systems, and maybe you're saying like the flaws in the system or the issues of wanting to see around it. I want to jump to, you say specifically, like, I'm not going to lay out a step-by-step formula and framework, But there is kind of a framework with these 4 elements or buckets or ingredients: empathy, systems, time, games. I want to talk about some of those. Systems makes a lot of sense to me. Like that seems synonymous. One of them I was surprised. I was like, why is games in here? And empathy, I'm like, okay, yeah, the people are involved. So like you have to win them over, or maybe I was like, as I'm starting, right, I'm trying to make sense of what trying to anticipate what are these going to be. I would love to hear from you how you came up with these 4. Why are these the things that are how you're going to help build your strategy and make better plans?
First, thanks for reading it so closely. Systems, we've already talked about a little bit. Let's talk about games.
Okay. Yes.
Being the bully in the office is a game. It's a game because the people who do it because they get what they want when they do it. And people who are bullied, who are uninvited to that game but are part of it, lose. And so when we watch the dynamic of bullying as a game, we can see that we, as people in this community, need to have a way to alter behavior or the system. Shelf space is a game. If you are Hellman's and there are Sir Kensingtons and there's Heinz and they all want more of shelf space at the local food town, they're playing a game. They can invest money or promotion or sales force time to get an extra 6 inches of shelf space. They're going to do that because they think they'll sell more mayo. And if they sell more mayo, they'll have more money to do it again. It's a game. If you make a bad move, it doesn't mean you're a bad person. It just means you made a move that didn't work. Let's figure out a different move. And so when we can start depersonalizing the things that are going on around us and realize everyone's just playing a game, right? Oh, someone called a meeting. That means their status is high enough that they could call a meeting. Oh, in the meeting, that person talked the whole time, wasting the time of everyone who was there because they could have just sent a memo. Why did they do that, right? That we know that the game we are playing, the prizes are status and affiliation. Who's up and who's down, who's part of something. And the thing is, the people in the ATD community are the rule makers. They're the ones who establish what the board is. They're the ones who are helping decide what things are like around here, building a system where games are played. So that's games. Empathy feels smiley and happy and important, but that's not the kind of empathy I'm talking about. Okay. I'm simply talking about the empathy that comes when we have the humility to realize this is all voluntary. People don't have to work here. People don't have to try hard. People don't have to bring their best self, right? They're only going to do those things because they want to, not because we want them to. That everyone who disagrees with you is right because of who they are, where they're coming from, the game they're playing, whatever they are doing is right. So if we want to announce that everyone who's not doing what we want is wrong, then we have no empathy. And if we want to change things so they'll want what we want, we have to have empathy for their narrative of the world. And the fourth one is time. And back to Lucy Grace, she is not the same piece of protoplasm she was 6 months ago. And she's going to be totally different in 13 years, I promise you. So we don't do what we need to do today just for today, except for changing diapers. Everything else we do is an investment in tomorrow. So the organization where we work, the work to do today is so that the us of a year from now will say, thanks. Thanks for doing that thing a year ago that was really hard. We're really glad you did that. That's what we're looking for when we think of a strategy. Not the urgent task, but what will our future self thank us for?
Well, we're not very good as people always of doing the thing for the future self. Like we think we will, but then in the moment we don't. Maybe going back to we do the thing that's easier, the false proxies. But I wanted to talk about when you were talking about empathy, people don't have to bring their best self. Okay, you said it made me think about in the book, you have this recommendation of it's hard to change the system. So maybe finding the people who want the things that you want. I might be saying this wrong, but what if no one wants what you want? Or how do you find them? Like, what if that's really hard? How do you know that, like, part of me thinks sometimes and maybe this goes back to the empathy. I'm answering my own question, that you use that to find the people who want the things that you want. Okay, I'm going to pass it over to you. Help me understand.
So, super simple example. Let's say I need to hire baristas for my coffee shop. It's tempting to hire for skill, to look at people who already know how to pull a good shot.
Mm-hmm.
But is that why my coffee shop is going to succeed? It's also tempting to hire people who are easily coerced to show up on time, go to their shift, and be managed. Is that what's going to make my coffee shop succeed? What if I hired people who are just friendly, interested, interesting, and excited? And then I taught them to make coffee. What would that coffee shop be like? So we say that makes sense, but then I go watch how you're hiring and how you're interviewing, and you're not doing any of those things. If you think about what kind of organization benefits from hiring people who have had a successful career in the military, it might not be the same kind of organization that hires people who used to be in the circus. So we need to think about, when someone shows you who they are, you should believe them. And instead of seeing who they are and changing them, why don't you just hire people who they are is what you need?
Okay. This is maybe answering another question I had. I wrote down a statistic to read to you so that you can help me understand. So the World Economic Forum's Future of Jobs report, I cannot stop thinking about this, their 2025 report, estimates that 39% of workers' skills will need to transform or become outdated, obsolete by 2030. So we're already well into 2025, so less than 5 years. L&D professionals are going to be tasked with building strategies to upskill, reskill employees for roles that don't exist yet. They're evolved, they're undefined. There's a lot of ambiguity here. Your example, I feel like has started to answer this question for me. I was going to ask you, what guiding principles or strategic approaches do L&D leaders need to keep in mind to be designing these skill development initiatives that are going to be able to be adaptive and even relevant or impactful in 5 years from now, when we don't know what's happening right this moment?
Yeah. So let me steal a little from my talk, if I could, which I stole from Zig Ziglar. And I talked about it 10 years ago, the last time I was at ATD, but I'm assuming people won't remember. So here we go. Zig, in 1975, before the internet, said the following: try to imagine that there's a worldwide computer system, and that system enables you to put in all the things you're looking for in the perfect employee or the perfect boss or the perfect coworker. And it will look through every single one of the billions of people on earth and bring you that person. Sounds a little like LinkedIn, but here we go. If I made a list of the dozen things that you were looking for, what kind of things would you put on the list? Resilient, hardworking, sense of humor, willing to try new projects, eager to communicate, open to feedback, skilled at the craft I need them to do. We can make a little list like that, right?
The attitude, things. Okay, the theme that we're talking about. Okay,
right. If we made this whole list, and I said, if I could find you someone just like that, is that someone you'd want to marry or work for or have as your boss or coworker? Everyone, because they made the list, says yeah. And I say, all right, well, how many of these things are skills? And how many of these things are gifts that people are born with? And how many of these things are attitudes? Well, if I make the list of gifts, there aren't that many, right? Tall is a gift, maybe being particularly well-spoken, but not too many. Okay, which ones are attitudes? And people mostly pick that the list that you and I just came up with are attitudes, including you picked good attitude, right? And then what about skilled? I need someone who can, replace a muffler on a 1974 Cadillac Seville. That's a skill, right? But wait a minute. Can I teach somebody to tell a joke a little bit better? Could I teach someone to be a little bit more honest? Could I teach someone to be a little bit more open to feedback? I think we can agree the answer is yes. Well, if I can teach it, it's a skill. So the key thing that I take away from the study you quoted is not the 39%, because I think it's more like 70%. It's the skills are real skills, sometimes called soft skills. That what we need is a workforce that if I give them access to Claude and a difficult problem, they will eagerly figure out how to solve it, not say, what do I do now? That what is going to happen, it is happening right this moment, is a human who knows a skill, the old kind of skill, is easily replaced most of the time because I can just look it up. But a human who is resilient and persistent and generous and creative, I can't look that up. So those are skills. How are we going to teach those?
Right. I keep thinking about like critical thinking comes up. This reminds me of, I asked Google recently, I wanted to see how many days old Lucy was. And the answer was very funny, the AI generated answer, because I was like, if she was born in September, and this was in February that I asked, how many days old does that make her? And it gave me a long bulleted response of how she's 7 days old. And I knew that she was not 7 days old, but I didn't know how many days. I just
Even if
knew
you're
that was
sleep
wrong.
deprived, even if sleep deprived, Alexandria knew she was not 7 days old.
Yeah. So I feel like there's some critical thinking or some type of skill you're going to need to be able to discern. I don't know what the answer is, but I know that's not right. And so we need to like collaborate on that to figure out what's the right answer. But it's so funny when you were talking about skills, gifts, attitudes, what are the things, the list that we're generating of the things that we want? One of my curiosities was about what are the things that will be trainable if, the things that we used to train on will be replaced by technologies. I was thinking about personality traits where it feels like if you don't have this openness, curiosity trait, maybe you're at or personality, the big five. I'm thinking of the ones that are like at least measurable and in enough different types of assessments that you might be at a disadvantage if you don't have that, but maybe it's something that you can develop to be more open, because it seems like we're going to need that in this environment.
Yeah, I'm really optimistic about human beings' ability to develop skills that look like attitudes. That doesn't mean everyone needs to become a shoe salesperson who's glad handing and smiling and good at repartee. There's so much neurodiversity. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, if you are in a room by yourself with an AI, there are many ways to interact with that AI to get a productive output. I don't care which one you use. All I care about is that you're not going to give up. And we can train people to do enormous ranges of things. There are people who are deep sea divers and there are people who surf. No one was born knowing how to do either of those things. So how do we, a recent example, I had a pump in my basement break, and the pump people wanted $7,000 to come fix it, and they wanted me to wait 2 months. So I took out my phone and I took 5 pictures of the pump, and then I went to Claude and we had a half an hour conversation about the pictures. And Claude would send me downstairs. I take new pictures back and forth and back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, and I fixed the pump. And how is that not the future of almost everything?
Mm-hmm. I think that's like in the very first page before maybe this book even starts, or maybe you have that. You're like, how to use this book. And it reminds me of that you're like, get your little group together, keep meeting. Maybe you pull out Claude, ask some questions. And I'm already thinking about it for some of the projects that I'm working on this year, how I can take these ideas. Because one of my goals, and I keep bringing it back to Lucy because, and time was this related to strategy. You suddenly don't have as much time. So one of my goals or mantras is how do I work smarter, not harder? And I want to apply that to strategy. How do I work smarter, not harder when it comes to strategy?
Yeah. Well, why doesn't everyone work smarter, not harder? Why is harder such a compelling option? And the
Yeah.
reason is you don't have to take any responsibility. That if you are a lawyer and you're billing 2,200 hours, you're better than the lawyer who billed 2,000 hours because
Mm.
obviously you're working harder. On the other hand, if I'm the managing partner of the law firm and I look at what I really need from an associate and I see that the lawyer who's billing 1,800 hours is also getting me new clients because of the articles they're publishing, which lawyer is more valuable?
Mm-hmm.
Right? And so what it means to work smarter is to be on the hook, to take responsibility, to say, I got you covered. I'll handle this. That's a skill. And we don't manage for it, we don't hire for it, and that is a huge problem. So one of the things you'll notice is that startup companies, 5 or 10 people, seem really efficient. Then they start making money, and then they have 400 people, and all of a sudden, they're not getting much more done than they were getting when they had 20 people. What has
Mm.
happened? What happened is they hired clerks who are rewarded for working harder. And if you have enough clerks in the organization, if the organization is stable, you're fine because it won't break, right? Like I like the fact that almost everyone who works at an airline is a clerk because the airline business doesn't change very often. And so planes don't crash. But if you're in an industry that changes, clerks aren't going to help you. So how do we create an environment where people choose, where we have empathy, people choose to level up and do things a different way? And that's post-industrial. And most of us work for industrial organizations. And so it's challenging. So let's just use another example. The book publishing industry, it's 500 years old. It has not changed significantly in a century. Their customer is not the reader. Their customer is the bookstore. Everything they do is organized around bookstores. Well, what do you do when the bookstore disappears?
Mm-hmm.
You got trouble. Like, why didn't Simon & Schuster or Random House start Google? Because they say that their goal is to organize the world's information. That's what Google does. It only took 2 people to start Google. But they were busy serving bookstores, not saying, how do I make it so that readers can find what they're looking for? As a result, their piece of the world keeps getting smaller and smaller because the world changed, not because they're bad people or lazy.
Mm. I want to talk about your story, your examples of the chocolate industry. And one of the reasons why I liked this one is because, well, you can give us a little more context about it. But if you're investing and buying chocolate that is fair trade, ethically made, direct to trade, it's more expensive. And again, I think about like those obstacles and the people our L&D community when they're trying to change the rules and they're in this position now. You've said they're not the order taker, they're the leader, they're creating the vision, but you're going to get pushback from someone who's like, that's too expensive, we don't do it like that. And then maybe that's why the chocolate industry story really resonates with me. Can we talk about that?
Yeah, so there are broken systems all around us. Halloween is a system.
Yeah.
Halloween is a system in which millions of kids dress up like gangsters, harass people, and get cheap chocolate in return. And if you're one of the harassed people, your goal is to get that kid to go away. And you're going to get them to go away by giving them cheap chocolate. So you buy cheap chocolate. The problem with cheap chocolate is the people who make cheap chocolate, like Hershey's and Nestle's, buy the cheapest, lowest quality cacao they can from the Ivory Coast in Ghana. And a lot of that chocolate is grown by children in slave labor conditions. And so this person who lives in Cleveland who bought a fun pack is actually participating in slave labor. So we can see this, and it's heartbreaking. It's also not
Mhm.
delicious. So what to do about it? Well, someone shows up like Sean Askinosie, who deals direct with the farmer, who pays them 5 times the going rate, who puts their kids through private school, who is fixing it and also making something more delicious. But an Askinosie bar costs 4 times as much. So what should a parent do? Well, if the parent views themselves as an isolated node in a system where everything needs to be normal, they will just feel lousy. So the answer is community action. The answer is what happens when one parent organizes 5 parents who organize a block. And now the whole block has a different approach to Halloween, right? What happens when we think about climate, where beef causes 25% of our climate problem? What happens when you organize just 20 parents and have Meatless Monday at the school cafeteria? Meatless Monday can quickly become Meatless Friday, and now you've eliminated 2 out of 5 days worth of beef. Community action builds new systems. So, what are things like around here can sometimes be in the purview of someone who has authority, like someone who is a member of ATD. So, when we think about this, what do you do when there's a bully, even if that bully is a powerful person in the office, right? The first time that a bully gets fired for being a bully, everyone is going to see that the system is different. The first time that a high performing bully gets to stay, everyone's going to see what things are actually like around here. So we get what we tolerate, we get what we measure. And there are ways you can do things that are dramatic, like saying to the bully, and this happened to me, so I know it from personal experience. He was a yeller, and we had an open office, so that's how I knew. And after I heard him berate a younger person in the office, I took him aside and I said, if you ever do that again, I will fire you in front of everyone in the company. And he knew I was serious. And he sent me a thank you note 10 years later. He had never yelled at anyone in any of the jobs he'd ever had since then, because no one had ever said it to him. No one had ever said, that's not the way things are around here. But it can also be more subtle than that. A friend of mine who runs a very big company is also a programmer. And he went into their systems on a Sunday and he deleted every recurring meeting in the whole organization, 7,000 people. He sent an email to everybody. He said, good news, your recurring meetings are all now canceled. If they were really important, you can put them back on the calendar. If not, I just saved you all this money and time. And that little shift, he's the boss, so he could do it, changes things. When we think about meeting culture, which is directly under the purview of someone who is in this field, how did the meeting culture at your organization get that way? I'm guessing it was an accident. So let's do it with intention instead.
I like that. Makes me think of Melissa Daimler's Reculture book. She talks about kind of revisiting because you could take things off of your calendar, but then a little while later, maybe you need a meeting to come back here and there. And so it can't just be like a one and done, it needs to be an ongoing thing.
Yeah.
I wanted to mention about chocolate. Have you been to the chocolate house in Washington, D.C., in the DuPont Circle neighborhood?
I have not. I thought I had covered the ground. Is it a retail store?
Yeah, and they have, I think you'll really like it when you're there for the conference in May. Maybe you can make a stop there. It's called the Chocolate House, and they have like over 400 different like varieties and
I
their
can't wait.
craft chocolate. I think they have a tasting room.
Alexandria, there are 74 different kinds of chocolate in that basket right there. I get in the mail every few weeks 5 different bars from a subscription, and then a different company sends me a different subscription, and there's Sean. So yeah, it's a serious vice, and I can't wait to get to Chocolate House. Thank you for the tip.
Of course. I'm just sad that I didn't know about the collectible chocolate bar that you created soon enough to have it arrive so I could try it and tell you what I thought before this conversation. So I'll just have to follow up with you and let you know what I think.
We can geek out about it all you want. And I gotta say, Lucy Grace is not too young to try a little piece of chocolate.
Yeah, well, we'll see. I'll let you know her thoughts too. I might wait a teeny bit longer. Okay, I had a lot of curiosity about the way that your book is structured. I think some readers might be surprised to discover that it's not seemingly organized in the traditional way. There's no page numbers. Instead of a table of contents, you call it a table of riffs. This I it truly when it took me a while to realize, because I was, reading through the numbers. I think I was thinking I was still in the introduction until I was like at number 30 or something. What's going on here? Um, I want you to tell us about the book structure, because I feel like it's meta and there's some strategy behind
Yeah,
it.
there is. So let me ask you a question. I'm guessing when she's a year and a half or 2 years old, you're going to start teaching Lucy about vegetables.
Hmm.
I'm guessing you're not going to go to the supermarket and get everything from avocado to zucchini with asparagus and melon in between and line them all up and say, today is vegetable day. Here are all the vegetables in order. That's not going to happen.
Hmm.
Yet all of us know our vegetables. How did it happen? Well, we mostly learn things in bits and pieces, not in a Linnaean taxonomy. And so, what I, as a teacher, do is try to create the conditions for an autodidactic experience. Autodidact, you can look up what it means. Once you know what it means, you will remember it forever. Not because I told you, but because you figured it out. And
Hmm.
so that light going on is the key to the entire experience. That when people read something that's organized from the top down, and many people on this listening to this podcast, that's what you do. You make manuals and stuff. The reader goes, and then they're done. And what I've discovered is the way people learn is there's a mystery and there's a puzzle and they solve it and they repeat. And we never forget how to use our badge reader if the first 3 times we used the badge reader it didn't work until we figured it out, right? And the same thing is true here. There are no page numbers because more than half the people who read my books are doing it electronically. So there are no page numbers there anyway. So if you say, let's talk about riff number 30, doesn't matter which format, you know what I'm talking about. If there's page numbers, what's the point? And there's no basic chapter structure because if I'm going to spend the first whole part of the book talking about systems, how can I talk about games? I haven't talked about games yet. And what I found as I was writing it is it's so interwoven, it's not even worth trying.
It totally makes me think about conversations I've had with Clark Quinn, if he's listening, when he's written several books with ATD. And that's the total challenge of writing, is that you have to choose an order and then stick to it. And to kind of go back to the systems, the nodes and connections analogy, the buildings and the roads, which of course made me think about how our brain is wired and designed. At first, I will admit, I was frustrated. I was like, how am I supposed to make sense of this? And then I was like, I think that I have to put in the work. I have to do the stuff.
Yeah.
And not everyone does that. We make things easier. Kind of to go back to, we like the hero complex. We try to make things hard for ourselves, and we make things easier for other people. There's so many good things in here. We're running out of time. So, one question: is there anything you want to mention before I turn back to focusing on you?
Well, I'd rather skip that part. I want to mention listening to this podcast is optional. Leading is optional. The people who are here, you are the future. You are not sitting in traffic. You are traffic. You have the chance to make it better. And that is the best way to complain, to make things better, to speak up, to do the emotional labor, and to make a change happen. And so the reason I show up is because people like you show up. And I couldn't be more inspired. So thank you for that. And if you want to talk about me, I guess you can.
Well, I do, because I have to ask the question that we ask all of our guests, which is, how are you getting out of your comfort zone right now? What are your current learning goals?
That's a great question. I There are projects I am working on now, some of which are craft oriented, like I'm installing a computer controlled CNC machine in my basement, and some of which are uh, emotional and involve dealing with humanity and change. A lot of it involves using Claude as my partner to inquire and to understand, and also to bring ideas to others that I'm not sure of yet, because that's scary because people expect me to be sure, and to see what happens.
That's awesome. I think you probably have a lot more learning going on than some other folks, so maybe they'll be inspired by all of the work that you are up to. I cannot wait for your main stage talk in May, and I hope some of our listeners will get to join us and see you there in Washington, D.C. And thank you so much, Seth, for taking the time to chat with me today.
You're a superstar. I'm really lucky. This is a great way to spend my morning. Thank you, Alexandria, and hugs to Lucy Grace.
Thank you.